What is she doing at my gate?
She actually came back looking like this?
I thought we'd never see you again.
I didn't come here to fight. Please.
Then leave. Then leave. Before you embarrass this family even more.
Grandpa, Mommy told me not to hate you.
What? Did you just say?
For 12 years, Charlotte Bennett had replayed this moment in her mind. She had imagined what it would feel like to stand before the Kingsley mansion again. She wondered if the memories would still hurt, or if time would finally dull the pain. It didn't. The towering white mansion looked exactly as she remembered. Every polished window, every marble pillar, every perfectly trimmed hedge reminded her of the life she had lost. But Charlotte wasn't the same woman who had walked away from those gates 12 years ago. Back then, she was the youngest daughter of one of the city's most respected families. She wore expensive clothes, attended charity galas, and believed that no matter what happened, her family would always stand by her. Today, she wore a faded cream cardigan over a simple gray dress, and the only hand she held was the tiny one belonging to her 5-year-old daughter, Sophie. Life had changed her in ways no one inside that mansion could ever understand. She had spent years moving from one rented room to another, accepting every honest job she could find just to keep food on the table. There were nights she skipped meals so Sophie could eat. There were winters when she slept without heat so her daughter could stay warm beneath every blanket they owned. Yet through every hardship, Charlotte refused to let bitterness become part of her daughter's childhood. Sophie never grew up hearing stories of revenge. She grew up hearing stories about kindness. As Charlotte slowly approached the mansion entrance, the heavy wooden doors opened. Standing there was Edward Kingsley. Time had turned his dark hair silver, but the authority in his posture remained unchanged. Behind him stood Margaret Kingsley, elegant as ever, and Nathan Kingsley, Charlotte's older brother, whose face revealed nothing at all. For a long moment, nobody spoke. It was as though the past itself had returned and was standing on the front steps. Edward was the first to break the silence. His eyes traveled from Charlotte's worn shoes to the little girl standing beside her before returning to Charlotte's face. There was no smile, no relief, no welcome, only disappointment. Charlotte had prepared herself for anger. She had prepared herself to be turned away. But nothing could have prepared her for the emptiness in the eyes of the man she had once called Dad. The same man who taught her to ride a bicycle. The same man who used to tell everyone she was the kindest person he had ever known. Now he looked at her as though she had never belonged there. Charlotte swallowed the lump forming in her throat. She hadn't returned for money. She hadn't returned to reclaim the mansion. And she certainly hadn't returned for revenge. She came back because Sophie deserved to know the truth about the family whose blood ran through her veins. But before Charlotte could explain why she had returned, whispers spread among the people gathered inside the mansion. Some recognized her immediately. Others simply saw a poorly dressed woman standing at the gates with a small child and quietly reached their own conclusions. No one asked where she had been. No one wondered how she had survived. They judged the chapter they could see. Without knowing the story that came before it, Charlotte lowered her eyes. For one brief moment, she hoped someone, anyone, would ask the question she had waited 12 years to answer. Charlotte, what really happened? No one did. Instead, Edward took a slow step forward, his expression as cold as the marble beneath his feet. The silence around them became almost unbearable. Then something unexpected happened. Charlotte felt Sophie's tiny fingers slip gently from her hand. The little girl walked forward with innocent confidence until she stood only a few feet from the man she had never met. Every eye followed her. Charlotte's heart began to race. She had no idea what her daughter was about to say. Sophie looked up at Edward with the same gentle smile she always wore. Then, in a voice so soft that it almost disappeared into the wind, she spoke the words that brought 12 years of buried guilt crashing back in a single instant. "Mommy said." I shouldn't hate you. Edward froze. The color drained from his face, because those 7 simple words shattered the story he had spent 12 years believing, and for the first time since the night he drove his own daughter away. Edward Kingsley found himself wondering if the greatest mistake of his life had never been Charlotte's betrayal, but his own. For several long seconds nobody moved. The words were simple. A child could have spoken them without understanding the weight they carried. But coming from Sophie's lips, they struck Edward Kingsley harder than any accusation ever could. Mommy said, I shouldn't hate you. Edward couldn't take his eyes off the little girl. He had prepared himself for resentment. If Charlotte had spent 12 years filling her daughter's heart with bitterness, he would have understood. After all, he had given her every reason to hate him. But that wasn't what stood before him. Instead, he saw a little girl with kind eyes, a child who had been taught compassion instead of revenge. And that made no sense. Charlotte gently stepped forward and took Sophie's hand again, her heart pounding against her chest. She never wanted her daughter to become part of the painful history between the Kingsleys. She had spent years protecting Sophie from that burden, not because the truth wasn't important, but because children should never have to carry the weight of their parents' wounds. Edward finally found his voice. It was quieter than before, almost uncertain. Why? The single word escaped before he even realized he had spoken it. Why would Charlotte tell her daughter not to hate the man who had turned his back on her? Charlotte looked into the familiar blue eyes that had once made her feel safe. For a brief moment, she saw the father she remembered. Then the moment disappeared. There are some things, she said softly, that children shouldn't inherit. No one spoke after that. Margaret lowered her gaze. Nathan shifted uneasily where he stood. Even the servants standing inside the hallway sensed that something had changed. The story they had believed for years suddenly didn't feel as certain anymore, because if Charlotte truly wanted revenge, why return with kindness instead of anger? Edward's mind drifted back 12 years. He remembered the night he watched Charlotte leave through those same gates with nothing more than a small suitcase. He remembered convincing himself that she deserved it, that he had done the right thing. He had repeated that lie so many times that eventually it became the truth in his own mind. Or so he believed. Charlotte broke the silence before those memories could consume him. I didn't come here to ask for anything. Her voice remained calm despite the tears threatening to escape. I built a life for my daughter. It wasn't an easy life, but it was an honest one. She looked down at Sophie, who smiled back without fear. There were days we had almost nothing, but she never went to bed believing kindness was weakness. Those words settled heavily over everyone standing there. Edward looked at Sophie again. The little girl reminded him of someone, not because of her appearance, because of her heart. Years ago, Charlotte had been exactly the same, always helping people, always believing the best in everyone. She was the daughter who remembered employees' birthdays, the one who stopped to speak with the gardeners while everyone else hurried past, the one who believed a person's character mattered more than their bank account. Edward suddenly realized something that made his chest tight. That part of Charlotte had never disappeared. Life had taken away her comfort, but it hadn't taken away her kindness. Nathan noticed the change in their father's face. For the first time in 12 years, certainty had been replaced by doubt. And doubt was dangerous, because doubt led to questions. Questions led to the past, and the past contained truths Nathan had spent years trying not to face. Charlotte knew she couldn't stay much longer. Coming back to the mansion had never been about reopening old wounds. She only wanted Sophie to know where she came from. Before the truth found them another way, she turned gently, preparing to leave, but before she reached the first step, Edward spoke. Wait. Charlotte stopped without looking back. The word hung in the air between them. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness, but after 12 years, it was the first time Edward Kingsley had ever asked his daughter not to walk away, and for Charlotte, that single word stirred a memory she had buried deep inside her heart, because 12 years earlier, she had waited for him to say exactly the same thing. He never did this time. He finally had. Charlotte stood motionless. She wanted to keep walking. For 12 years, she had dreamed of hearing Edward ask her to stay. She imagined it so many times that eventually she stopped believing it would ever happen. Now that the words had finally come, they felt almost unreal. Slowly, she turned around. Edward's face no longer carried the confidence of a man certain he was right. Instead, it showed something far more unfamiliar, uncertainty. For the first time in years, he looked at Charlotte not as the daughter who had disgraced his family, but as someone whose story he had never truly heard. "I think," Edward said quietly, "we should talk." Charlotte searched his face. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that 12 years of silence were finally coming to an end. But trust doesn't return simply because someone asks for it. It has to be rebuilt, one choice at a time. Without saying a word, Charlotte nodded. Edward stepped aside, allowing Charlotte and Sophie to enter the mansion. As Charlotte crossed the doorway, memories flooded back all at once. The polished marble floors, the grand staircase, the crystal chandelier that once fascinated her as a little girl. Everything looked exactly the same, everything, except the feeling. This house had once been her home. Now it felt like a museum filled with memories that no longer belonged to her. Sophie looked around with wide, curious eyes. She wasn't impressed by the expensive furniture or the towering ceilings. Instead, she smiled at a large family portrait hanging on the wall. It showed a much younger Edward standing proudly beside Margaret, Nathan, and Charlotte. "Daddy," Sophie whispered innocently. "Were you happy here?" Charlotte's heart tightened. She knelt beside her daughter and gently brushed a strand of blonde hair away from her face. "There were happy days," she answered softly, "and there were sad ones." Edward overheard every word. He couldn't stop staring at the old family portrait. He remembered the day it was taken. Charlotte had insisted that one of the housekeepers join the picture because she said, "She's part of our family too." Everyone laughed at her. Edward laughed too, but secretly. He had been proud of the kind-hearted daughter he was raising. How had that same daughter become the person he believed capable of betraying him? The question refused to leave his mind. Moments later, everyone gathered inside the sitting room. No one seemed comfortable. The silence felt heavier than any argument. Nathan avoided looking at Charlotte altogether. Margaret kept folding and unfolding her hands. And Edward remained standing as though sitting down would somehow make him lose control. Finally, he spoke. "Spent 12 years believing I knew what happened." His voice was steady, but no longer certain, and today, he paused. "I'm not so sure anymore." Nathan immediately looked up, his pulse quickened. That sentence frightened him more than Charlotte's return ever had, because if Edward started asking questions, the past would no longer stay buried. Charlotte took a slow breath. "I never came back to prove anyone wrong." She looked directly at Edward. "I came back because Sophie deserves to know where she comes from." Edward glanced toward the little girl quietly coloring on a sheet of paper one of the housekeepers had given her. She smiled to herself, completely unaware that the adults around her were carrying 12 years of regret. A lump formed in Edward's throat. He suddenly realized something painful. He had missed every birthday, every first day of school, every Christmas, every milestone in his granddaughter's life, not because Charlotte kept Sophie away, but because he had closed the door first. That truth was almost unbearable. Charlotte reached into her worn handbag. For a moment, everyone watched in silence. She carefully removed an old brown envelope. Its edges were faded from age. It had clearly been carried for years. Edward frowned. Charlotte looked down at the envelope before lifting her eyes to meet his. "Kept this with me for 12 years. Her voice was calm. "I promised myself that if the day ever came when you were willing to listen." She gently placed the envelope on the coffee table. "You would finally see what I never had the chance to show you." Nobody moved, nobody spoke. Edward stared at the envelope as though it carried the weight of his entire life, because deep inside, he already knew whatever was inside that envelope had the power to destroy everything he believed about the night he lost his daughter. The room remained silent. Edward stared at the worn envelope resting on the coffee table as though it might disappear if he looked away. Slowly, he reached for it. His hands, once steady enough to build a business empire, trembled ever so slightly. Inside were several aged documents, bank statements, printed emails, a handwritten notebook, and a flash drive sealed in a small plastic sleeve. Edward frowned. He recognized the company logo on the documents immediately. They belonged to Kingsley Holdings. Charlotte watched quietly as he turned the first page. "There were irregular transfers," she said. "Someone inside the company had been moving money through shell accounts. I found the records by accident." Edward's eyes widened as he compared the dates. Every transaction had happened just weeks before Charlotte was forced to leave the family. "I brought this to Nathan first," Charlotte continued, her voice calm. "I thought if we worked together, we could show you everything." Nathan lowered his head. The guilt he had carried for years finally became impossible to hide. "I was afraid," he admitted. "I thought exposing it would destroy the company and our family." "So you stayed silent," Charlotte replied, not with anger but with sadness. Nathan nodded. His silence had allowed someone else to act first. The evidence was altered. Rumors spread through the company. By the time Edward heard the story, Charlotte had already been made to look like the one responsible. Edward closed his eyes. The memories returned with painful clarity. He remembered refusing to hear Charlotte's explanation. He remembered believing the accusations because they seemed easier than questioning the people he trusted. Most of all, he remembered watching his daughter walk away without calling her back. "I failed you," he whispered. Charlotte looked at the man who had once seemed larger than life. For the first time, she didn't see the powerful businessman. She saw a father crushed beneath the weight of his own mistake. "I never wanted to prove you wrong," she said softly. "Only wanted you to know that I never stopped loving this family." Edward looked across the room at Sophie, who was quietly drawing a picture of three people holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Without realizing it, she had drawn the family they could have been. A tear slipped down Edward's cheek. No business loss had ever hurt this much, because fortunes could be rebuilt, but 12 years with his daughter and 12 years with his granddaughter could never be returned. Edward folded the documents carefully and looked at Charlotte with eyes filled not with authority, but with regret. "I can't change the past," he said, "but if you'll let me, I'd like to spend whatever time I have left making things right." Charlotte didn't answer immediately. Some wounds needed more than words to heal, but for the first time in 12 years, the truth no longer stood between them. Only the future did. Edward spent the next few days doing something he had not done in years. He listened, not as the chairman of Kingsley Holdings, not as a man protecting his reputation, but as a father desperate to understand the daughter he had lost. Charlotte told him about the tiny apartment where she and Sophie had lived, the jobs she worked to keep food on the table, and the countless nights she lay awake wondering whether she had made the right decision by protecting the family instead of exposing everything. She never exaggerated her suffering. She simply told the truth. And somehow, the truth hurt Edward more than any accusation ever could. Margaret also found the courage to admit her own mistakes. She confessed that she had allowed pride and appearances to cloud her judgment instead of standing beside Charlotte when she needed her most. Nathan apologized too, not because he expected forgiveness, but because he finally understood what his silence had cost. Charlotte listened to each of them. She didn't pretend the past hadn't happened. Some memories would always remain painful. Some years could never be replaced. But she had learned something during those 12 difficult years. Holding on to anger would never give her back what she had lost. It would only steal the peace she had fought so hard to build for Sophie. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't about saying the past didn't matter. It was about refusing to let the past decide the future. Slowly, life inside the Kingsley mansion began to change. For the first time in years, laughter returned to the halls. Sophie filled every room with the curiosity and kindness her mother had taught her. She loved listening to Edward's stories about the garden, helping Margaret bake biscuits in the kitchen, and following Nathan around with endless questions that always made him smile. Watching them together, Charlotte finally saw something she had almost stopped believing in. A family learning to become a family again. One quiet evening, Edward and Charlotte stood in the garden as the sun disappeared behind the trees. "I used to think success meant protecting everything I'd built," Edward said, "but I almost lost the greatest gift I was ever given." Charlotte looked toward Sophie, who was running across the lawn with carefree laughter. "We all make mistakes," she replied gently. "What matters is whether we have the courage to face them." Edward nodded. For the first time in 12 years, peace replaced the guilt he had carried. He knew he could never recover the birthdays he had missed, the stories he had never heard, or the years he could never relive. But he could choose what happened next, and this time, he chose his family. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't healed by money, power, or status. They're healed by truth, by humility. and by the courage to ask for forgiveness before it's too late, because one little girl with a heart untouched by bitterness reminded an entire family of something they had forgotten. Hatred may divide people, but kindness has the power to bring them home. Her words had changed everything. Mommy said I shouldn't hate you. Those 7 simple words became the beginning of a new chapter for the Kingsley family, one built not on pride, but on love, honesty, and second chances. If you enjoyed this story and want more powerful, emotional stories like this, be sure to subscribe to Stories by Dimmy so you never miss the next unforgettable journey. And now I'd love to hear from you. If you were Charlotte, would you have forgiven Edward after everything that happened, or would you have walked away forever? Let us know in the comments below.